Sueli had always been there for Tasha, through every scraped knee, every sleepless night, and every milestone that marked the passage of time. Her life had been built around the needs of her daughter. Nothing else mattered. Every decision, every sacrifice, was made with Tasha in mind. As a single mother, Sueli had devoted her world to her only child, feeling that her purpose was fulfilled in the happiness and well-being of Tasha. There was no room for distractions, no space for others to enter their tightly knit world. But as Tasha grew older, Sueli noticed the subtle shift, the pull of independence. Tasha was no longer the little girl who needed her mother for every decision. She was blossoming into a woman with her own ideas, her own dreams. Sueli couldn't help but feel a pang of loss. But she understood. It was only natural for Tasha to spread her wings, and yet, something inside Sueli longed for something more. A part of her that she had buried beneath the layers of motherhood began to stir, quietly asking for attention. It was then that Sueli met Kayo, a man who made her feel seen again, not just as a mother, but as a woman. It had been years since she allowed herself to think about love, about being cherished and cared for in return. Kayo brought a spark into her life, something fresh and exciting that she hadn't felt in a long time, but the thought of introducing him into their world, into Tasha's life, caused her to hesitate. Would Tasha understand? Would she accept this new chapter? Sueli wasn't sure, but she couldn't deny the desire to live again, to experience the connection she had missed for so long. As the weeks passed, Sueli's relationship with Kayo deepened. They spent more time together, sharing dinners, walks in the park, and long conversations late into the night. It was as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She felt rejuvenated, as if she were discovering parts of herself she had forgotten. Kayo was kind, attentive, and treated her with the respect and admiration she had been longing for. Slowly, she began to imagine a future with him, a life beyond motherhood, something for herself. But as Sueli's happiness grew, so did the tension. Tasha, though outwardly supportive, seemed more distant, almost cold. The smile she gave Kayo was polite, but there was something in her eyes, a hint of discomfort, of jealousy even. Sueli noticed the subtle signs, the way Tasha would avoid being in the same room when Kayo was around, or how her responses to him became shorter, more clipped. It was hard to ignore, but Sueli tried. She told herself it was just a phase. Tasha was just adjusting to the changes, just as she had when she was younger. However, deep down, Sueli couldn't help but feel a growing unease. She wanted Tasha to be happy for her, to embrace the love she had found, but there was an invisible wall between them now. Sueli could feel it, the distance that was creeping into their once inseparable bond. She wondered if she was being selfish, if her decision to pursue her own happiness was too much for Tasha to handle. Still, she couldn't bring herself to push Kayo away. She had lived her life for Tasha, but now it was time to live for herself. She just hoped Tasha would understand in time. Tasha's discomfort grew more noticeable with each passing day. At first, it was the little things, the way she avoided eye contact when Kayo spoke, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, but soon the unease became impossible to ignore. Tasha began retreating more into herself, no longer confiding in her mother as she once did. The bond that had always been so strong between them seemed to be fraying at the edges, and Sueli couldn't help but wonder if it was her fault. Was she being too selfish? Was this all worth it? Tasha, however, couldn't bring herself to voice the confusion and turmoil bubbling inside her. She felt like a stranger in her own home, watching as Kayo took up more and more space in the life she had once shared so closely with her mother. Every time she saw them together, it felt as though she were watching a new version of Sueli, one who wasn't hers anymore. She didn't know how to express the mix of jealousy, hurt, and fear that weighed heavily on her chest. She wanted her mother to be happy, but part of her feared losing the woman who had always been there for her. And yet, there was another emotion growing inside Tasha, a confusing, undeniable pull toward Kayo himself. She couldn't explain it. At first, it was just admiration, a simple recognition of how kind and attentive he was toward her mother. But as the days went by, something shifted. His presence became magnetic. The way he smiled at her, the way his laughter filled the space between them, something in her began to stir, something she had no control over. It was wrong. She knew that, but it was also irresistible. As Sueli's relationship with Kayo blossomed, her life began to feel fuller, brighter. She was no longer just a mother. She was a woman in love, rediscovering a part of herself that had long been buried under the weight of responsibility. Kayo was attentive and understanding, and with him, she felt alive in ways she hadn't in years. He was the breath of fresh air she had been craving, a reminder that her life could still be filled with joy, laughter, and tenderness. But despite Sueli's growing happiness, there was a lingering worry in the back of her mind. Tasha, how was she feeling about all of this? Sueli watched her daughter closely, noting the moments of tension when Kayo was around. Tasha's smiles were forced, her conversations with him brief and awkward. Sueli had hoped that Tasha would warm up to Kayo, that the two would eventually bond over time, but it seemed like the gap between them was only widening. Sueli tried to reassure herself that it was just a phase. Tasha was going through her own struggles with independence, and this new chapter in Sueli's life was bound to be a difficult adjustment. She remembered the teenage years, the rebellion, the confusion. She told herself that Tasha would come around, just as she had when Sueli had first started dating after her divorce. But despite her best efforts to remain positive, there was a subtle, nagging feeling deep inside her, a feeling that something wasn't quite right. As the days passed, Sueli found herself growing more and more attached to Kayo. Their moments together felt like a sweet escape from the demands of motherhood. They would laugh over dinner, share intimate conversations late into the night, and plan a future that felt full of possibility. Sueli hadn't felt this way in so long, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was more than just a mother. She was a woman with desires, hopes, and dreams of her own. But while Sueli reveled in the warmth of her blossoming relationship, Tasha's behavior became more withdrawn. She had always been close to her mother, but now it felt as though a barrier had been erected between them. Tasha had become quieter, less engaged in family conversations, and when Kayo was around, there was an undeniable tension in the air. Sueli tried to brush it off, thinking that Tasha was simply adjusting to the changes, but the discomfort between them was palpable. Tasha couldn't understand it, this strange, unexpected feeling that was growing inside her. She had always admired Kayo, thought him to be a good man for her mother, but over time, something shifted. The small gestures, the way he looked at her, the moments of shared laughter, something about it started to feel different. She couldn't explain it. She had never once thought of Kayo in that way before, but now, every glance, every word, felt charged with something she couldn't control. The more Tasha tried to push her feelings aside, the more they seemed to grow. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was something deeper, something she wasn't ready to face. Every time she saw Kayo with her mother, a pang of jealousy twisted in her chest. Why was she feeling this way? Was it because Kayo was taking up space in their home, in their lives, or was it something else? Tasha couldn't pinpoint the cause, but the emotions were undeniable. Sueli, on the other hand, remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing between her daughter and Kayo. She saw the tension, of course, but dismissed it as a passing phase. She told herself that things would settle down once Tasha adjusted to the new dynamics in their home. After all, Tasha had always been a sensitive soul, and change was never easy for her. But as Sueli dreamed of a future with Kayo, she couldn't help but feel a nagging unease, wondering if Tasha would ever truly accept him, or if this rift between them would grow wider with time. For Tasha, the struggle was becoming unbearable. She loved her mother, of course. Nothing would ever change that. But her feelings for Kayo were confusing, shameful even. She didn't know how to reconcile them, and she certainly couldn't tell her mother the truth. How could she? How could she admit that she was falling for the man her mother had brought into their lives? The man who was meant to be her mother's love, not hers. Let me know your thoughts on this block. Are we ready to move to Chapter 3? Or would you like to adjust anything in Chapter 2? As the weeks went by, the unspoken tension between Tasha and Kayo simmered just beneath the surface. It started innocently. Small moments, a shared laugh, a glance that lingered a little too long. But soon, those fleeting moments began to carry weight. Tasha found herself thinking about Kayo even when he wasn't around. She wondered how his smile felt, how his presence made the room seem just a little bit warmer. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was something more dangerous, something she couldn't control. Tasha tried to push the feelings away, convincing herself that they were just a passing phase, a temporary lapse in judgment. After all, Kayo was her mother's boyfriend, not someone she should be looking at in that way. But every time she saw him, her heart would race, and she couldn't ignore the spark that had ignited between them. She hated herself for it, but at the same time, She couldn't stop it. It was as if something deep inside her had awakened, something primal and raw that she couldn't keep hidden any longer. The more she tried to resist, the stronger the attraction became. It was as if Kayo's presence stirred something deep inside her, something that made her feel alive, wanted, and desired in a way she had never felt before. It wasn't just the way he looked at her, it was the way he made her feel seen, as though she were more than just Sueli's daughter. But this attraction, as powerful as it was forbidden. She knew that. She couldn't let herself go down this path. Yet every glance, every smile, only seemed to pull her deeper. As the days turned into weeks, Tasha and Kayo's secret moments grew more frequent, more intense. At first, it was nothing more than a lingering touch, a shared joke that no one else understood. But slowly, they began to steal moments in private, away from Sueli's watchful eyes. Their conversations became more personal, the distance between them shrinking until it felt like there was no one else in the room. Kayo, though equally conflicted, couldn't deny the chemistry that sparked between them. What started as simple admiration soon became something much more dangerous. Tasha's emotions were a whirlwind. She felt guilty, of course. Guilty for betraying her mother, guilty for wanting something that was never hers to have. But there was also a part of her that didn't want to stop. She couldn't remember the last time someone had made her feel the way Kayo did, the way he laughed, the way he listened to her. It made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. And with every stolen kiss, every quiet conversation, that pull between them only intensified. The guilt gnawed at her, but so did the longing. She found herself constantly wondering what it would be like to be with him, to feel his touch without the weight of their secret. But at the same time, the thought of what she was doing to her mother tore her apart. Sueli had no idea, and Tasha feared the consequences more than anything. What would happen if Sueli found out? Would she ever forgive her? Would the love between them ever be the same again? Despite the guilt and the whirlwind of emotions, Tasha couldn't stop herself. Every encounter with Kayo felt like an electric charge, something she couldn't ignore, something that was becoming impossible to resist. The line between right and wrong blurred more with each passing day. She had told herself that it was just a fleeting moment of weakness, something that would fade, but it didn't. Every stolen kiss, every touch, only made it harder to walk away. Kayo, too, was torn. He had never intended for things to escalate like this. He had come into Sueli's life to bring her happiness, but as he spent more time with Tasha, he began to see a side of her he hadn't expected, something tender, vulnerable, and captivating. He knew it was wrong, that he was playing with fire, but he found himself pulled deeper into their secret affair. Every moment with Tasha felt like a contradiction, a mix of excitement and dread, desire and regret. He wasn't sure where it would end, but he knew it couldn't last forever. And yet, neither of them knew how to stop. The attraction, the chemistry, was undeniable. But as they continued to cross lines they should never have crossed, the weight of what they were doing became too much to ignore. The guilt, the fear of discovery, the damage it would cause, it all began to weigh heavily on both of them. But in that moment, they were trapped in a dangerous dance, each step drawing them closer to a point of no return. The question now was not if it would be discovered, but when. The truth always finds a way to surface. Sueli had known something was off for a while, small things that didn't add up. The strange tension in the air whenever Kayo and Tasha were in the same room. She tried to brush it aside, thinking it was just her imagination running wild. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't until one evening, when she walked into the living room, that the truth was laid bare before her. Sueli had walked in on a conversation between Tasha and Kayo. They didn't see her at first, their voices too low, too intimate to be just casual. Sueli froze at the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't want to eavesdrop, but she couldn't move, couldn't look away. What she heard next would forever change everything. Tasha and Kayo, speaking in hushed tones, were confessing the affair. Sueli felt her world crumble around her. Her daughter, the girl she had loved and protected her entire life, was involved with the man she had brought into their home, the man she had allowed into their lives. The shock, the heartbreak, the utter betrayal hit Sueli like a physical blow. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All she could hear were the words echoing in her mind. "I didn't mean for it to happen, but I couldn't stop it," Tasha had said. And Kayo, his voice so full of guilt, but also something else, something darker, perhaps a tinge of regret, or maybe just the realization of the damage they had both caused. In that moment, Sueli's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. The silence that followed felt deafening. Sueli's legs buckled beneath her, and she stumbled back into the hallway, her mind racing to process what she had just heard. She wanted to scream, to confront them both right then and there, but all she could do was stand frozen, the weight of the discovery crushing her. How could this happen? How could Tasha do this to her, to their family, to the man she had trusted? And how could Kayo, someone she had allowed into their home, someone she had welcomed with open arms, betray her like this? Tasha, sensing her mother's presence, turned around. Her face went pale, and for the first time, Sueli saw pure fear in her daughter's eyes. The guilt was written all over her. She couldn't hide it anymore. She opened her mouth as though to speak, but the words never came. There was nothing she could say that would make it right, nothing that could explain the betrayal, the lies, the hurt she had caused. Sueli's heart ached, not just for herself, but for Tasha too. The realization of how much her daughter had been struggling with this secret was almost as painful as the betrayal itself. Sueli felt her emotions swing between disbelief and raw fury. She wanted answers. She wanted to know why. Why had they done this to her? Why had they torn apart the trust that had held their family together for so long? Sueli's love for Tasha ran deep, but in this moment, all she could feel was betrayal. Her daughter, her only child, had crossed a line that could never be undone. And Kayo, he was supposed to be the one person she could trust. The man who had rekindled the spark in her life had now become the very symbol of her deepest hurt. The confrontation was inevitable. Sueli's anger and heartbreak surged to the surface as she stepped into the living room, her gaze fixed on Tasha and Kayo. How could you? Sueli's voice was low, but filled with a pain that cut through the air like a blade. She couldn't believe this was happening, couldn't believe that her own daughter and the man she had welcomed into their lives had betrayed her in such a profound way. It felt as if her world had tilted off its axis and she couldn't find her balance. Tasha, visibly shaking, finally spoke. "I never meant for this to happen, Mom. It was a mistake." Her voice trembled and the words felt hollow in the space between them. Sueli's eyes, filled with hurt, never left her daughter's face. The words, "it was a mistake," seemed to mock the magnitude of the betrayal. How could it be a mistake when it had been deliberate? When every moment between them had been carefully hidden, calculated? It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Sueli's gaze shifted to Kayo, the man who had swept into her life like a breath of fresh air and now stood before her like a stranger. His face was pale, guilt written all over him, but Sueli could see something else lurking behind his eyes, a sense of self-preservation, as if he was already preparing for the consequences of his actions. "You knew this wasn't right," Sueli accused, her voice quivering with emotion. "You knew it from the moment you came into our lives. And now, look at what you've done. You've destroyed everything." The anger bubbled up inside her, but it wasn't just directed at them. It was at herself, too. She had let them both in, and now she was left with nothing but the wreckage of what was once her family. The shock of the revelation lingered in the air like a thick fog. Sueli's heart felt heavy, her mind clouded with rage and hurt. She needed to act, to take control of the situation, but she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that her life, her family, had been irreparably torn apart. The betrayal wasn't just from Kayo, whom she had trusted, but from Tasha, her own flesh and blood. The pain of it felt suffocating. Sueli knew that something had to be done, something drastic, to make them understand the weight of their actions. Sueli's mind began to churn with thoughts of revenge. She wasn't proud of it. No, it wasn't what she had ever imagined for herself, but in that moment, the desire to make them feel the same anguish she felt was overwhelming. She could hear her own voice in her head, demanding retribution. They had stolen her peace, her trust, and now they would pay the price. Kayo and Tasha had crossed a line, and there would be consequences. But as the plan began to take shape in her mind, Sueli couldn't ignore the small voice of doubt that whispered in the back of her head. What would revenge really achieve? Would it heal the wounds, or would it only deepen them? She felt trapped in her emotions, caught between the desire for justice and the knowledge that this could destroy her relationship with Tasha forever. Still, the anger was consuming. The idea of revenge was intoxicating, like a sweet but dangerous poison. She knew that it was a path she couldn't turn back from. Sueli's plan began to take form, cold and calculated. She spent sleepless nights, turning over the details in her mind, imagining the way she would confront them, make them see just how deeply they had hurt her. She wanted them to feel the pain, the loss that had settled in her chest. Every part of her, from the anger to the betrayal, fueled her determination. She couldn't let this go. She couldn't let them get away with it, not when her heart was torn in so many pieces. But as she prepared to carry out her revenge, a strange feeling started to settle over her. The anticipation of causing them the same pain she felt was slowly replaced by a growing sense of doubt. What would be left after the dust settled? Revenge would only create a chasm between her and Tasha, between her and Kayo. And even if she succeeded in making them regret their actions, what would that do for her? Would she feel better? Or would it only feed the emptiness that had already settled within her? Sueli knew that the course she was on could never be undone. Revenge would forever change the dynamics between them, leaving wounds that might never heal. She would destroy not just their bond, but her own heart too. Still, in the depth of her hurt, the desire to act, to make them feel the weight of their actions, overpowered the voice of reason. Sueli had been betrayed by those she loved the most, and for that, she needed retribution. But as she thought of Tasha, of how lost and broken she had looked during the confrontation, a faint flicker of hesitation passed through her mind. Was it too late to turn back? Let me know how this block feels, or if you want any adjustments before we proceed with the final block of Chapter 5. The day of reckoning arrived, and Sueli followed through with her plan, each action fueled by a mix of anger, hurt, and a deep sense of betrayal. She confronted Tasha with harsh words, with a coldness that felt foreign to her, but it was necessary, she told herself. She needed to show Tasha the consequences of her actions, to make her feel the weight of what she had done. Sueli's voice trembled, but she kept her composure, her heart heavy with the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. Tasha, for her part, was broken. She had expected anger, but not this level of cruelty. Her mother's words stung, not just because they were true, but because they came from the woman who had always been her safe place, her anchor. Tasha tried to speak, to apologize, but no words could undo the damage. Her betrayal was laid bare, and the guilt that had been eating away at her became unbearable. The mother she had once known was slipping away, and all she had left was the consequences of her choices. Kayo too felt the weight of Sueli's vengeance. He had tried to talk to her, to explain, but his apologies fell on deaf ears. The anger in Sueli's eyes was a mirror of his own guilt, a reflection of the pain he had caused. But there was nothing he could say to take it back. The trust that had once existed between him and Sueli was shattered beyond repair. He could see the hurt in her eyes, the devastation in every word, and he knew that no amount of regret could change what had been done. Sueli stood, watching the fallout of her actions, her heart torn between the satisfaction of having made them feel her pain and the deep, gnawing realization that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new chapter of loss. The love she had once known, the connection with her daughter, had been irrevocably altered, and no revenge could heal that wound.